And I think there's something of importance, too, of a purely factual matter to keep in mind, that the Russian action in February 2 years ago was not unprovoked. Not only was it not unprovoked, it was preemptive.
The world is preparing for war. You may not know it, you may not believe it, yet the signs are written on the wall with bold, bloody letters for everyone to see. The problem is that nobody wants to read them. We are being told that killing tens of thousands of unarmed civilians in Gaza is justified, and that fighting a war in Ukraine till the last Ukrainian is in our best interest. If you too are tired of this narrative, then you need to hear from Michael J. Brenner. As an Emeritus Professor of International Affairs, he's seen it all and he's not afraid to tell it like it is. Brenner calls out the US for being the biggest bully on the block, recklessly pushing NATO's boundaries right up to Russia's doorstep, and then acting surprised when the Russians do not accept what the US did not accept during the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's nuclear weapons of an adversarial nation just a couple of miles away from the mainland. And the professor argues that this isn't just a case of bad diplomacy, which would be bad enough, but that it's a deliberate strategy to provoke Russia and maintain American dominance in the region. He's especially critical of the Biden administration, which he believes is just as culpable as its predecessors in escalating the conflict. In Brenner's eyes, the US has a nasty habit of ignoring Russia's legitimate concerns, and he thinks this kind of arrogance could lead to a nuclear disaster. Brenner sees the US as a nation that's addicted to war, always looking for the next big fight to feed its insatiable military-industrial complex. He argues that America's obsession with being the world's policeman to enforce its own interests has led to a foreign policy that's dangerously disconnected from reality. But Professor Brenner doesn't stop here. He highlights the hypocrisy of US foreign policy, pointing out that while America claims to stand for democracy and freedom, history shows that, more often than not, it supports the world's worst dictators and suppresses dissent whenever it suits its interests. In short, Michael J. Brenner is the calm voice in the storm and the wake-up call that's urgently needed. If you want to understand what's really going on in the Russian-Ukraine conflict, then the following interview is for you. Okay, and now before we jump in the interview, a very quick call to action. Some of the best interviews on this channel are shadow banned, which means YouTube is not presenting them to you, the viewer. Some examples are Noam Chomsky's interview about Israel, the interview with Tom Suarez, the author of Palestine Hijacked, the amazingly candid discussion with the US Ambassador Chas Freeman, or the interview with the former director of the Max Planck Institute, Wolfgang Streeck, to name just a few. So if you're interested in content that apparently you're not supposed to see, content that goes against the mainstream narrative, have a look at some of the previous interviews that we have recorded for your pleasure. And of course, it really helps to spread the news if you like and subscribe to this channel. Here we go, Professor Michael Brenner. What a pleasure having you again. And I have to say, I'm very grateful for your time because you are spending now the second time a session with me. And I just promise this time we keep it within the hour. I promise you, Professor. How are you?
I'm fine. I'm really pleased to join you again.
Thank you. So in the last session that we have, in the last interview, we were focusing on the Israel-Palestine conflict in lack of a better term. And this time we focus on another conflict, the war in Ukraine. Now, a couple of days ago, and me not knowing if you had time already to look into this, but a couple of times we had the Chorus City Hall attack in Moscow. Did you? What's your vision?
Yes. No, I followed it as best one can.
Okay, so what's your impression? I mean, the US basically 5 minutes after the attack already they said it's ISIS, and then they apparently pre-warned Russia, which turns out to be not exactly the case. They warned US citizens in Moscow to either leave Russia or not to go to any concerts. And then they said, in retrospect, they informally warned Russia. Is this how that normally works?
Well, from what I understand, and this is based largely on the comments of people who've had personal and direct experience in these kinds of matters. For example, Mr. Larry Johnson, who was head of counterterrorism for a number of years at the CIA and has been a critic of American policy generally in Ukraine, but his view on that is irrelevant insofar as he doubtless does have expertise. He says this is contrary to all standard procedure. In other words, when you do receive information of that sort and you want to transfer it to another party, even one that who's a competitor or a rival or even hostile, and this has occurred on several occasions. It even occurred back in the old Soviet days in terms of communications between the United States and Moscow. You don't send informal communications. You do it either through that country's ambassador. In other words, in this instance, it would be the Russian ambassador in Washington, or you send a senior embassy employee in Moscow to the foreign ministry. The swiftness with which the statement was made is itself, according to people who do have this experience, is itself sort of indicative of a pre-planned sort of contingent sort of cover story. And I think that's probably the case. It's very difficult, based on what we do know, to get a full picture or a clear picture as to what was behind it and how things developed. Best estimate, I think, based on what we do know in the context and the circumstances, is that first of all, these people who perpetrated the act and those who assisted them in Russia, in Moscow, they were not jihadis. They didn't behave as jihadis, don't look like jihadis. They were not at all jihadis, nor were they professionals. They were thugs for hire. And it does seem in which some branch of ISIS, had them on call and contracted with them, did it all on the web, or email, if you like, or this what do they call it? Telegram.
Telegram.
Sort of site, didn't meet in person. The people who organized it might have met with some other individuals, other members of the team in Moscow or somewhere else. These people also were Tajiks, but they got the training, if you like, such as it was in Turkey. Now, Turkey has harbored over the past 13 years now, since the revolt in Syria began, a whole host of jihadis. They expedited the efforts on the part of ISIS, first its formation, and then the transfer of personnel, of arms. They exported for ISIS the oil in northeastern Syria when it was in the possession of ISIS. And of course, they are direct backers of al-Nusra, which in effect is Al-Qaeda in Syria. And Erdogan uses in the al-Nusra people who are concentrated in Idlib for various purposes. They were sent to Libya, for example, to counter the move of Colonel Hada on Tripoli, and that was done in connivance with the United States and the Western allies who were opposed to Haida. Erdogan also sent them to Azerbaijan, where they played a significant role in the defeat of the Armenians. But anyway, I think that's a secondary importance. The suspicion is that this was a plan concocted and animated by the Ukrainian security services. They used ISIS as a cutoff. and which provided for sort of plausible deniability. Did the United States and the other Western allies know about it? We can't be sure for now. Most probably they did, because they have seeded so many people in the Ukrainian security service. I think it's called the SBU. It's unlikely they would have been entirely ignorant that something was afoot. Whether they knew the details, I don't know, although they certainly did know that the first attempt would be made on, what was it, the 8th of March. So exactly what the connection was, we don't know. This might have been undertaken by a rogue group, or might have been taken by the Ukrainian security services, who tried to conceal it from the Americans. The Americans certainly had a sense of what was going on. I would think that there was a certain ambivalence or difference of opinion in senior policy circles in Washington as to whether they should intervene or interfere so as to block the action. And that's based upon, I think, more basic policy differences as to whether it would be desirable to have Ukraine, with or without Western backing, to carry the war onto Russian territory. And that would entail not only acts of terrorism of this sort, which has precedents on a much smaller scale, series of assassinations in Russia, but also involving the use of missiles like the French Scalp, the British, call it, I forget the name of the British missile, or the German Taurus, which might be on its way to Ukraine to target various sites of military infrastructure in Ukraine.
In Russia.
Commentators who alert to the inner workings of U.S. government realize that there are certain factions involved. They all agree on the main purposes and the main policy lines, but they might disagree on tactics. And so this curious sort of informal communication in its ambiguity might reflect the collective ambiguity of the Biden administration as to exactly how to proceed and to what extent to identify the United States with it, and to the extent to which the United States should or should not contribute.
You said something important. You said correctly, there were apparently 2 attempts, right? And between the first and the second attempt, at the 22nd, Victoria Nuland got sacked, right? Now, I heard reports, and again, I had not time to really dive into that, so I have only a superficial knowledge here. Yeah? But apparently, Victoria Nuland, and we know that from some interviews, she spoke of a nasty surprise for Russia, right? Just before the first attempt. Then between the first and the second attempt was Victoria Nuland was actually fired from her job. Yeah. So what I heard, there might have been a relation between her being sacked and these terror attacks. Yeah. So a theory that I heard was that Victoria Nuland was in the background involved in this terror attack, was called back by the Biden administration. She nevertheless proceeded with it, and as a consequence was fired from her job. I don't know if that's something that you picked up.
Well, there are two viewpoints on this, and again, these are viewpoints of people with personal experience in intelligence sort of circles, as well as contacts in political circles in Washington. One view is that indeed that this was one of the actions she had in mind when she made that very undiplomatic allusion in a street corner, informal sort of interview. There were some other things that the Ukrainians done of some consequence, which might have been what she had in mind, and need not necessarily have involved or included this attack at the Crocus site. Just remember 2 weeks ago, the Ukrainians sort of launched an assault in the north towards Belgorod, which was of considerable strength. It involved a number of militia units composed mainly of Russian nationals, of Nazi tendencies. In fact, Russia, curiously enough, over the years has had its own sort of skinhead Nazis. By the way, one of their meetings back in the 2000s was addressed and instigated and encouraged by Mr. Navalny. And there are videotapes of him addressing a group of Russian neo-Nazis carrying swastikas, symbols, and other signs. He was reinvented himself with the assistance of Western intelligence agencies, and then was put back onto the stage as a champion of democratic rights and civil liberties. But anyway, so that assault might very well have been aimed at a Russian facility. I understand is on a base that's on the outskirts of Belgrade, which in the past contained a storehouse of nuclear weapons. And nobody's sure whether this goes back to Soviet days, whether the Russians still use it for that purpose. But of course, that would have been an extraordinary coup if this group was able to penetrate to that point, seize the base, and actually gain possession of these nuclear weapons. So she might have had that in mind. We don't know. Well, I think we can confidently say that the notion that the United States, in various agencies of the United States, in MI6 in Britain, which is up to its neck in underhand doings in Ukraine and Russia, were totally ignorant of this. I think that's a bit far-fetched.
You just mentioned the British, and this is a side question, yeah? Now, I completely understand why the US is trying to weaken Russia. I mean, we don't have to go into this. Yeah, for me, that's very clear. Yeah? What's less clear for me is why historically, let's just say it this way. Of course, there were reasons for the animosity between Great Britain and Russia historically. Yeah, but I mean, for Boris Johnson to go to Zelensky and, after the Istanbul negotiations, to torpedo what basically was an agreement already a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine, yeah. Is that only because the US kind of, takes the lead here? What's the real interest for, I mean, I specifically ask you, seeing the experience, your lifelong experience on this field, yeah? So what's the real interest of the UK here? I mean, yes, it's an ally of the US, yeah? And yes, it supports the US, but clearly the goal of the US and UK must be a different, the geostrategic goal cannot be only for Great Britain to upkeep the hegemonic superiority of America. So what's in your view? What's in for the UK?
Well, I think there are two things to keep in mind. I mean, first, that Britain does not have an independent foreign policy or an independent strategic perspective on security matters of the first order. By the way, that might be said of the EU and its members and the United States as continental allies, as well. I think in this instance, they all not only took their lead from the United States, but shared the perspective that Russia should be kept on the margins of European affairs, should be kept weak, right? Because they really didn't know how to deal with and to handle a Russia that was politically stable, that was vibrant, that was not aggressive, but simply had a presence in European affairs commensurate with their inherent capabilities. Economic, diplomatic, and least of all, frankly, military in any objective terms. And American officials and European officials like Mr. Borrell in Brussels and all of the British leaders and Mr. Macron and so forth, and of course the German government, have made it clear and have stated in so many words that the objective in Ukraine is not to save the Ukrainians, it's to weaken Russia. And a Russia that is demonstrating greater self-confidence and diplomatic initiative under Putin was something that the West was not comfortable with and didn't want to live with. And so under American instigation, they decided to use Ukraine as a sort of battering ram to do significant and lasting damage to Russian influence. And let's remember, this goes back some time. The move to invite Ukraine into NATO goes back to 2008 when it was proposed by then President George Bush. And we now know that the Minsk Accords, for which Britain and France were supposed to be underwriters, were never taken seriously by them. Both Angela Merkel and Mr. Hollande in France have now admitted that it was all a ploy to win time in which they could strengthen Ukraine and prepare Ukraine to seize back Donbass and Crimea. And I think there's something of importance, too, of a purely factual matter to keep in mind, that the Russian action in February 2 years ago was not unprovoked. Not only was it not unprovoked, it was preemptive. The Ukraine, with American encouragement and backing, was preparing a military assault on the Donbass. And let's remember that President Biden himself, early in February, when tensions were already, quite high, said, well, the Russians are going to attack, and he gave a date, February 16th. Why February 16th? Did he have inside information as to Kremlin plans? No, because February 16th was the day in which the Ukrainian forces began a massive artillery assault on the Donbass. Adding to the thousands of civilians they already had killed since 2014, right? And preparing the ground for an invasion, if you like. And the artillery barrage directed at the Donbass at that time was 10 times as heavy as any of the sporadic assaults that had preceded it over the years. And people totally ignore this, but it's a matter of cardinal importance. And the Russians were placed in a very difficult position because if they did not act preemptively, they would have found themselves on the defensive. If they did act, as eventually decided they had to, of course, then they would be accused of aggression, and this whole story of unprovoked sort of Russian war making would take hold. And I think the Biden people saw this as a clever move, that, however Moscow reacted, they would come out winners. If Moscow did not take the bait, then they would be on the back foot in the face of this kind of military action by Ukraine. If they didn't take the bait and realize that they had to act preemptively, then you get what you've gotten. Not only Russia declared an aggressor, but beyond that, it was hoped that the war, however it went, would gravely weaken Russia. Don't forget the expectation, which was very high and almost universally accepted, not only in Washington, but in London and Berlin and Paris and Brussels, was that the economic sanctions alone, along with the losses that the Russians would suffer on the battlefield, would result in a collapse of the Russian economy, right? and likely to lead to popular unrest, which they foresee as perhaps being able to topple Putin, which is the ultimate end. If you topple Putin, then you reduce Russia to the condition that it was in under Yeltsin: pliable, weak, ready to have its resources exploited by Western companies. And all of this was sort of clearly laid out, because it was all based on assumptions and premises that are proven faulty. In most instances, it was off by 180 degrees. And ever since Russia has demonstrated extraordinary economic resilience, their economy is now stronger than any European economy. Right? The Germans, the British are in recession, Italy and France are stagnating, associated problems, right? But the war has strengthened the position of Putin, whose favorability ratings by poll takers who are not organizations that are not creatures of the Russian government, but rather supported by Western organizations. So he has a favorable rating of between 78 and 80%, and after this last attack on on the concert at Crocus, has gone up over 80%. So ever since this became evident, which was probably after 6 months or less of the onset of the conflict, the West has been a total state of confusion. Literally doesn't know what to do. So it lives in its own, one lobe of the collective brain lives in a fantasy world. They're going to achieve their objectives, and the other just continues along an inertial path, which is militarily self-defeating, but rests on the thin reed of hope that as long as Ukraine keeps troops in the field, that this eventually will somehow weaken Russia. And of course, now with the electoral season coming up, especially in the United States, with burden politics in utter disarray, with Macron, popularity ratings sinking, the German government on life support. None of these leaders are prepared to admit defeat. If Joe Biden were to admit explicitly or implicitly defeat, this might lose him the election. Similarly, the current British government will lose anyway, but none of them want to admit how mistaken they were, and so they just sort of keep plodding along. This is not a responsible way for governments that presume to be the leaders of the world and shaping international affairs, coming up with some cockeyed rule-based system in which the United States has a free pass to set its own rules and to violate all rules, is not going to come to pass. And so their whole strategic framework, which has been built up and constructed really since 1991, is now in jeopardy. Not only in jeopardy, it's already, I think, proven to be no longer viable, but they're not prepared to face up to the new realities of the world. So they just, muddle along. And since there is no serious opposition in these countries, political or intellectual, calling attention to how feckless and irresponsible and self-defeating Western policies have been, they just sort of continue down the same path, leading nowhere except to a further weakening of Western presence and influence in the world.
It's incredible. You touched on quite. I mean, I have a whole list in front of me as always. Yeah, but you touched in this explanations from you on quite a number of topics, as if you followed my script. Yeah. One or two things. Yeah. So the Minster Accords that you mentioned. Yeah. As a diplomat or as a politician from a foreign country, from any other country except from our Western world, yeah, there were two Minsk agreements, right? Those agreements were actual contracts signed by head of states. And the same head of states later say they never intended to adhere to those contracts.
Right.
Now, what does that do with the credibility of those countries, specifically Germany and France, so Angela Merkel and Hollande, but by extension also to let's say UK and America? I mean, future conflicts. What are the unintended I mean, over and beyond the obvious. Yeah, what are the unintended consequences of this kind of behavior?
It's a drastic loss of credibility, and thereby a drastic loss of influence. And the inability to recognize that is due to two things. I mean, one, how our leaders sort of living in a fantasy world, which is really disengaged from reality, what psychologists call dissociation. And two, when there's a sort of dissociation, people normally get a rude shock when they encounter an element of that reality they can't contend with. But what is the environment in which they live? Well, they live in an environment populated by the people they talk to being their fellow leaders who share the same illusions and are inhabitants of the same fantasy world. And that, of course, is extraordinary because, yes, you have unanimity, near unanimity in the West, and you get a meeting in which the G7, Mr. Biden, Mr. Trudeau, Mr. Sunak, Mr. Scholz, Mr. Macron, none of them very imposing figures, and you bring in Mr. Michel and Frau von der Leyen, right? They simply reinforce each other's view, and so the group as a whole becomes more rather than less divorced from reality. And they totally discount and downplay the reactions elsewhere. I mean, the Russians, of course, and particularly feel he's been misled and deceived time after time after time, which is an objective truth. And for the Chinese, they have no greater trust in anything the Americans do and say, look, the United States now have troops in Taiwan. As they continue to utter the totally vapid phrase, yes, we respect the one China policy, which they manifestly don't. And then there is the rest of the world, what they call the global South. It's not just the global South, it's everything but the collective West. The standing of the United States in particular is a reaction to the combination of Gaza, defeat in Ukraine, humiliation in Ukraine, moral catastrophe, if you like, in Gaza, is to open a real sort of gulf which is perceptual, intellectual, at the level of sentiment and feeling way between the collective West and the rest of the world. It is literally the rest of the world. Yeah. And you would have thought that this would register at some point, at some level. It doesn't, but our so-called leaders just, continue sort of blindly in ignoring the kind of mess they themselves have created. It's more than a mess. I mean, there are fundamental changes now in the international system underway before Ukraine and Gaza, which have been greatly accelerated, extended, and deepened. But there is no strategic debate. Now, there's none in the United States, except, there's some very able and experienced people who are on the margin, but they are not heard. They are never quoted. They're not allowed to, or invited to write an op-ed in the New York Times or the Washington Post. In Britain, there's almost no one. In France, there are a couple of individuals, well, less prominent than their American counterparts. In Germany, sort of no one. I mean, so it's a dire situation when not only do you have leaders individually and collectively pursuing a sterile line of policy, which is registering losses day after day, but you have no internal discussion, serious discussion, or debate whatsoever. And so, without, I mean, and certainly no political formation of any consequence, which is calling all of this into question. And the end result is, this extraordinary decline of the West, if you like, in terms of its influence and place in the world.
Yeah. We come to the decline in a moment on a different topic. Yeah. But there are happening two things now at the same time. Yeah. So first is Putin's position in the war is hardening. Putin calls now Odessa a Russian. Putin said Odessa is a Russian city, indicating he might try to take Odessa. Yeah. So Putin's goals are shifting. Putin's goals at the beginning of the war were different than they are now. Right. And at the same time, the US seems to delegate the war more and more to Europe / specifically Germany. Right. So do you see it feasible that America pulls out more or less out of this proxy war between the US and Russia, so that it can focus more on a confrontation on the coming, as if those two wars are not already enough? Those planners already think ahead to the coming war with China.
Well, there are some people who say that, and there are even some people who are part of this establishment consensus who try to nuance things and saying, well, we should try and get some kind of settlement in Ukraine because the big show is China, and you still have these extraordinarily mindless people who, saying war with China is inevitable in the next 3 years, the next 5 years. And so not only is that reckless and totally irresponsible, it's not based on any evidence whatsoever. This is, in psychological terms, this is a country that's losing its self-confidence and sense of prowess. And the loss of prowess to the United States, which has always felt itself to have a special mission in the world as being exceptional, is very difficult to swallow. Right? To be even, equal to the strongest other, or even to be first among equals, is unsatisfactory. And so what you do is you flex your muscles in front of a mirror, and you seek out every opportunity to demonstrate you still have the right stuff and you're still top dog. And so you look for conflicts, you look for disputes. I mean, it's the United States which unilaterally has created this tense rivalry and competition with China. It's nothing that China has really done. Same thing, another way with Iran. We look for enemies everywhere. Venezuela, Nicaragua, sort of Cuba. Right? It's, in psychological terms, it's really pathological. And certainly, Russia. Right? But the United States is not going to disengage. I think that this notion that the United States is going to leave Ukraine and leave it and let the problem drop into the lap of the Europeans it needs a lot of qualification.
Well, there is some historical. Sorry.
Because the United States has invested too much. It can't walk away from it.
It walked away from 20 years in Afghanistan. I mean, it walked away out of Libya. It walked away from Iraq. There's a history of
20 years in Afghanistan, sort of chasing Pashtuns around the mountains and deserts, and came away with absolutely nothing.
Exactly.
But so we're not going to give up on Ukraine. And the president is moving heaven and earth to get the Congress to appropriate this sort of $60 billion package, which is, when you look at it, it's really a giant subsidy program for American defense contractors, because most of the 60 billion would return to the United States in paying for either the weaponry and the munitions, which might be sent, or more likely, you send Ukraine things that are in stock, but then you have to replenish. And so you pay these big corporations like Lockheed and General Dynamics to replenish it. And that leaves, maybe 15 billion to be spread around among Zelensky's circle and others in Kiev, and to keep the Ukrainian monetary system, such as it is, its head above water. But frankly, there's no evidence yet that the Biden administration has thought through what an off-ramp might be. Even the so-called some mild skeptics within the foreign policy community administration, what they say is, well, we should give the Ukraine more assistance, more help. We should urge them to continue these strikes on Russian territory and hold on long enough so that perhaps we could get an agreement acceptable to us, because what we consider acceptable, we rejected out of hand by the Russians. And you're quite right. I don't think, well, let me say this. I don't think Russia's goals have changed. What's changed is the notion of what has to be achieved in Ukraine to fulfill the national interest and therefore to reach those goals. I mean, what Russia is aiming for is to prevent, at any time in the foreseeable future, for Ukraine to become an agent, if you like, an instrument of the West, to threaten, even sort of weaken Russia. And don't forget the agreements that the Minsk agreement, and then the agreement that was fashioned in April 2 years ago, which was then sabotaged by Washington. Boris Johnson was just the messenger, if you like. Would have left Ukraine intact, but
and neutral, intact and neutral. Yeah,
but ensure that it would be neutral, never join NATO, and would have minimal military capacity, which would have been a great deal for Ukraine. Certainly for Ukrainians, if you like, if not for, the current forces that now dominate Ukrainian, politics. But since the West, up to this point, has shown no inclination to formally accept that state of affairs, which would be acceptable to the Russians said, well, we probably have concluded, and the evidence suggests that this indeed is their conclusion, that we have to occupy more of Ukrainian territory, not because we really want to absorb it and govern it. I mean, Ukraine is an economic basket case, face it, but simply to ensure that Ukraine would never be in a position to attack Russia. And so you want to move whatever the line turns out to be of division within Ukraine far enough west so that Ukrainians never under any circumstances would be able to attack Russian territory, which means the Donbass and Crimea, as well as, the rest of Russia. And that the current cabal in Kiev, conniving with the West, would no longer be in charge. Now, that was not a goal of Putin. He did talk about denazification, and of course, some of the neo-Nazis and the other ultranationalists are really the driving ideological force behind the Zelensky government, even though he was elected on a peace platform. And then within 2 weeks of his being inaugurated, the serious tough guys made him a proposition he couldn't refuse. So I mean that's why the Russians are going to go farther, and they probably will to occupy Odessa and Kharkov, and they'll do that whether there are 1,000 French troops parading up and down the boulevards of Odessa or not. I mean this is Macron's immature adolescent sort of gesture to prove that he really counts, and
The last little French guy who tried this left 500,000 dead French soldiers on Russian soil. I find
yeah,
this just
exactly.
incredible. Yeah, Germany invaded Russia. Russia gave up East Berlin without a single shot. Russia sacrificed almost, depending on which numbers you take, between 25 and 35 million dead people. People, not only soldiers, people in the Second World War, versus 450,000 dead US soldiers, right? So the notion that Russia wants to invade all of Ukraine, for anyone with a grain of brain, yeah, the Germans used 1.5 million soldiers to occupy Poland in the Second World War.
Yeah.
Russia took 180,000 soldiers initially to go into Ukraine. According to Western strategists, Russia would need at least five times that number, about a million people, if they really wanted to occupy all of Ukraine. Yeah, but till today, you have people saying we, the West, need to prepare now for war with Russia, because Russia not only wants to take all of Ukraine, but will from there expand into other countries such as Norway, Finland, Sweden, whatsoever. And I'm saying this because a leading Swedish or Finnish military, I forgot his name now, said in an interview that I saw that we have to prepare for war with Russia. Yeah, so I find this extremely concerning. If and we see this in a number of countries. Yeah, I saw another interview where a leading U.S. politician said in front of I think it was a university. It was a woman. She literally said, "You may not be interested in war, but war will be interested in you." Yeah. So they're priming the young people already to have a physical war with Russia. This is what is just mind-boggling, because there is no war with Russia. There can only be a nuclear exchange with Russia, which is also finding its way into speeches. Yeah, as if this is just a minor thing, a survivable thing. Yeah, I find this highly
Well,
concerning.
that was, I think you were quoting what Madame Karas of Estonia.
Could be. Yeah.
I mean, who's a silly, feckless sort of person. Uh, in order to understand this, and you have a more direct sense of this than I do about the psychology and the subconscious, you know, upwellings of sentiment from the subconscious, which are influencing what Europeans do, don't do, say, and don't say. You have to apply, I think, psychopathological concepts, individual and collective. There's nothing logical about this. There's nothing normal, you know, about this. Anyone with their feet on the ground, there isn't going to be a war. There's no Russian aggression. There's no interest in it. In fact, you have the suspicion that not only Western leaders, but those advising them, don't even read or listen to what Putin said. I'm not aware, in fact, of any head of a significant, such a great power, who has been as explicit as Putin has been for the last 16 years, since his 2008 speech at Davos, or was it 2007, right? As to how he actually sees Russia's place in the world, its relations with Europe, etc. And there's not is a scintilla of suggestion in all of those long speeches and things he's written of an inclination to extend Russian physical control and domination westward. Right? Nothing. And so, how do you explain this pervasive attitude you get all across the West? Well, I mean, one thing which is a given is the incredibly low caliber of the people who govern us these days. I mean, Britain has been reduced to, as some witch said, as John McCain called Russia a gas station with nuclear weapons. Well, Britain is a hedge fund with nuclear weapons. What does it amount to? Total armed forces is 70,000. Similarly, with the Germans and particularly the hawks who dominate this government, they're not prepared to do anything really, really serious. Or another way to look at this psychology, is children conjure up monsters, right? And they scare themselves with, right? For a reason I'm not entirely sure. I don't know much about child psychology. It's often the case, They say, oh, they're monsters down in the cellar and basement. And the kids don't run and they make believe, they hide. And they open the door down to the cellar creak and they look down, they take 2 steps and they say, it's some odd sort of behavior. Well, children do that, but this doesn't affect is one of European. They're playing a game.
The problem is that the population believes them. Large parts of the
Well,
population
because they
believe
control the media.
Yeah.
There is no, as I said, debate. There's no serious opposition in any of these places. And so they win. I mean, look at this kind of, particularly the Swedes on the fence. I know are getting out onto to a slender branch in terms of presuming to amateur psychological insight that I don't have the credentials for. But, the Swedes missed out on 20th century history, 19th century history, right? European history, particularly the wars, very much to their advantage based on reasoning, which was very sensible. No disputing that. But now they seem to have trying to fill an emotional void, feeling they missed out somehow on something at some psychological sort of level. And, there's some insight into the can be found if you watch these sort of Swedish television shows and series and films in which the big thing is creating sort of scenarios in which Sweden is threatened by terrorists. Sweden is in a great existential crisis. And it's sort of an emulation or fabrication of what's gone on in Berlin, in Washington during the heights of the Cold War and then of the war on terror and so forth. And it's and I think that relates to the way Swedish leaders and Finnish ones are acting now. It's part of this sort of games playing, unwitting, but nonetheless it is games playing, filling some kind of emotional, psychological need, but which itself is divorced from reality. It's not going to have dire consequences insofar as those countries really don't count for anything, but it helps to confirm for the fantasists in Washington, London, Berlin, and Paris and Brussels their own misconceived notions as to what the world is like these days and what they can do and what they should be aiming for.
Yeah. Sweden, you said Sweden missed out on the 19th century, right?
And the 20th, especially.
20th century. Yeah. So, well, there's a different vision to that. Yeah. So in 1968, Olof Palme was murdered. His murder is still not It's still not clear who actually was behind it. Yeah? So America saw Olof Palme as aggressively neutral, and apparently that was already a crime. Yeah, Kissinger called him, pardon my French, an asshole. Yeah, so Sweden played a role in the 20th century, and it played a role, at least partially, that was not to the pleasure of America, right? Now I see what happens now. Sweden joining NATO. It's just a final. Well, it's just one step in a whole string of steps that affected Sweden in the background.
The Swedes, remember, they had this curious episode of Soviet submarine
Exactly, the
in the
so-called
ship in the Freya Golden around Stockholm, and they couldn't find it. So I don't know whether Sweden's supposed expertise in anti-submarine warfare is one of the things that makes them attractive to NATO. But I'm sorry, that's just.
And since you said the submarine scare, yeah, we know today from declassified documents that was a concerted effort in order to sway the Swedish public opinion against Russia, and they succeeded. Something from 14% anti-Russian sentiments to over 80% anti-Russian sentiments. Yeah, and again, we know from declassified documents today these were actually NATO submarines, right? So there's a whole story behind it. And I know that by coincidence, because I'm interviewing two subject matter experts, one of which was in the Swedish government once when Olof Palme was murdered, in regards to this situation.
That in a way, the Kissinger and the American attitude towards Palmer sort of foreshadows its attitude today. Well, when they began that post 9/11, George Bush saying you're either with us or against us. And then just last year, the United States pronouncing, Prime Minister Imran Khan,
Pakistan, yeah.
Pakistan as being hostile to the United States because the phrase that was used was aggressive neutrality.
Same as with Olof Palme,
He
yeah.
instigated his toppling by his enemies in Pakistan and especially the military. We made it very clear, and we had a lot of leverage, financial and otherwise, in Pakistan. You had to get rid of this guy, which of course they've done. Whether it was in accordance with a rule-based international system or not is something that we might ponder.
Professor, I promised you on top of the hour, we have 6 minutes left, and there's one topic I really would like to run by you still. You said the decline of Europe, right? And I would like to bring this into the context with the Nord Stream attacks, because the decline, for example, Ambassador Friedman called it deindustrialization that's taking place as a direct consequence of the Nord Stream attacks, right? So I would like to get your point of view. What happened there? Who did it, as far as you know? What's the consequences? The unspoken consequences. I mean, incredibly, the unspoken consequences of this attack on a critical or highly critical infrastructure of a NATO ally.
Well, I mean, in concrete terms, we know that the economic consequences of it. I mean, it's greatly accelerated the deindustrialization of Germany. And I don't think there's any other historical precedent to a head of government, in effect, acquiescing in and having foreknowledge of another power's destruction of a vital infrastructure project. Children knew what was going to happen. I mean, Biden had telegraphed it a year before, and they ran it by him. There's no doubt. But I mean, Schultz is an incredibly weak person. You know that as well as I. And
do you have any doubt that the US was involved?
sorry?
Do you have any doubt that the US was involved?
No, there's no doubt. I mean, everybody knows it. Everybody acknowledges it. They just don't admit it publicly. I mean, the notion that these sort of five guys and a woman in bikinis on a yacht, pulled it off. It's so ridiculous. I mean, it's a Saturday Night Live skit, as they say. I mean, it's just another indication of how infantile, in fact, some of the public relations of Western governments are and how shameless they are. I think somebody just as realistically suggested that it was Captain Nemo, the captain of the Nautilus and his crew, who blew up the pipeline. I mean, that's as credible as this notion of six people in a yacht skinny diving in the Baltic in cold temperatures and being able to go down whatever it is, 1,000 feet and blow up a pipeline. So we know, but I think Germany is probably the most extreme case of psychological dependence on the U.S. In Britain, it goes deeper and is perhaps even greater. But I mean, in Germany, it's a particular sort of salience because it was the bond with the United States after World War II, let's remember, and beginning very shortly after the war, which enabled Germany to reconstitute itself, to reinvent itself, to have its reinvention accepted very early on. Of course, now it's quite genuine. And to become an integral player in European and Atlantic affairs. And I'm told by German friends, it's really still, even to this day, almost 80 years later, for Germany's political class to contemplate being out there in the cold, cold world without the United States, not only holding their hand, but guiding them and so on and so forth. And that's, at a certain level, they don't see Europe and the EU as a substitute, with good reason, of course. So, I mean, keep reverting to the psychology, but I don't think you can really understand not just the international dynamics of transatlantic relations, but even things going on internally, a place like the United States, without looking beyond conventional ideas and concepts of diplomacy, of foreign policy, derived from political science or even economics. There is, I think, a psychological element far more prominent than probably it's ever been in recollected, memory.
I think it's incredible.
It's another topic, and
Yeah.
I don't have credentials as a member of the American Psychiatric Association, so I better not pursue this too far.
Yeah. I think it's incredible that a German head of state apparently had foreknowledge of another country attacking its critical infrastructure, which has consequences for generations to come. Yeah, it's not so that you can decide, okay, we repair the thing and we get again Russian gas, because Russia meanwhile has signed a 50-year contract with China. So the Russia direct its energy resources somewhere else. In the marketplace, there's like a sponge; it will soak up, all the energy that it can get. Yeah. One last thing for the Nord Stream, right? I interviewed Eric Anderson. He's a former Boeing engineer. He is the only one who did an independent expedition and research in regards to the Nord Stream attacks. He actually went there with a boat, with a underwater drone, and filmed the actual explosion sites. Yeah. I can send you some links. Yeah, they made even a 3D representation from the sonar they made. Yeah, guess what they found? They found a U.S. diving boot. Yeah, one. Yeah. What's so special? So those divers, they hate those boots because there are 4 pounds of lead in it, but they have to wear them because otherwise they might risk to puncture their suits. Right. The trick is to make them stick because sometimes they lose them. To make them stick, they use a tape, right, around
Mhm.
those. Yeah. And this is exactly what he found down there on the floor. Yeah. And one other interesting detail that Eric told me, there's the explosion site is actually in an underwater valley.
They
You
call
know,
it
it's
trough.
trough, okay, which is about between 70 and 80 meters deep. But left and right from the site, the pipeline is on 30 meters. So why would they not do it in 30 meters where it's much easier to attack? Yeah, there's only one reason. They would want to make it as difficult as possible for others to reach the site. Yeah. Anyway, I just found this boot, yeah, that he found that is not mentioned anywhere else. Yeah, quite interesting. Yeah. On that note, Professor, we are 2 minutes over the full hour. I'm really grateful for your time, and I'm telling you, I mean, we could go on, we could go on with this discussion for another hour or so, but I do not want to overstay my welcome. It
That's fine. I mean, it's quite an extraordinary commentary on this current state of political discourse in all of our Western countries that one has to rely on programs like yours and their analogs in the United States, which they're a number, and those like Pascal in Tokyo, in order to have a serious engagement, the kinds of issues, the analysis, in fact, even the factual realities of what's going on, and you don't have in mainstream political discourse at any level any approximation of it anywhere in the West. Now, that's a singular fact of life that I think one has to look at closely to understand where we are at and why we are in this unfortunate position.
Professor Brenner, it was my pleasure. Thank you again for your time. And you will definitely hear from me. Okay? Thank you again.
I look forward to it.
Likewise.